The fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects above cell block D. Maria Santos hadn't slept in 47 hours, but it wasn't insomnia keeping her awake. It was the smell. Cleaning solution mixed with something metallic, something wrong. The guards had mopped the corridor 3 times since yesterday, scrubbing the same spot outside cell 47 until the concrete gleamed. But everyone knew. You don't clean a floor that thoroughly unless you're trying to erase what happened there. Maria pressed her back against the cold cinderblock wall of her cell, watching through the narrow gap in her door as Officer Brennan made another pass with the mop. His movements were mechanical, almost frantic. The bucket water had turned pink 2 hours ago, but he kept going, kept scrubbing. She could hear him breathing hard, could see the tremor in his hands when he wrung out the mop head. Cell 47 had been empty for 3 days now. Its previous occupant, a woman named Claire Donovan, was listed in the infirmary with a fall-related injury. But Maria had heard the sounds that night. The scuffling. The brief, cut-off scream that went unacknowledged in the morning count. And she'd seen Officer Brennan's uniform when he left the block at 2:17 a.m., the dark stains he tried to hide by keeping his arm tucked against his side. The prison had a rhythm, an unspoken pulse that governed everything. Maria had learned it in her 18 months here. You learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to see and when to go blind. Claire Donovan had forgotten that rhythm. She'd threatened to report something she'd witnessed in the guards' break room. She'd told her cellmate she had proof, photographs somehow smuggled in from the outside that could bring down half the staff. Now Claire was gone, and the floor outside her cell gleamed like an operating table. Maria's cellmate, a wiry woman named Tasha Williams who'd been inside for 6 years, sat on the lower bunk with her eyes closed, but Maria knew she wasn't sleeping. Tasha's breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. She was doing what everyone else in D-Block was doing, pretending not to notice, pretending the world was exactly as it had been 3 days ago. "Stop staring," Tasha said without opening her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Whatever you think you saw, you didn't see it." Maria turned away from the door, her heart hammering. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." Tasha's eyes snapped open, dark and hard. "You're doing that thing. That witness thing. That's how you ended up in here in the first place, isn't it? Seeing something you shouldn't have seen?" The accusation hit closer than Maria wanted to admit. She was in Ridgeway Correctional because she'd witnessed a murder outside a convenience store in East Sacramento. A gang execution carried out in broad daylight. She'd testified, done what the district attorney called the right thing, and the next week someone had planted 12 grams of heroin in her car during a routine traffic stop. The drugs weren't hers, but that didn't matter. Her credibility as a witness disappeared the moment the arrest report was filed. Now she was serving 8 to 12 for possession with intent to distribute, and the men she'd testified against were still walking free. "I'm just saying," Tasha continued, her voice dropping even lower, "Claire made the mistake of thinking the truth mattered more than staying alive. You want to make the same mistake." Before Maria could respond, the intercom crackled. "Santos. Maria Santos. Report to Assistant Warden Holloway's office." Immediately, the blood drained from Maria's face. In 18 months, she'd never been called to administration. Never been singled out. That was the key to survival, invisibility, blending into the gray concrete and steel until you became part of the architecture itself. Tasha sat up slowly, her expression unreadable. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I swear I didn't." "Then why are they calling you?" There was something in Tasha's voice now. Not quite fear, but a recognition of danger, like an animal sensing a predator nearby. Nobody gets called to Holloway's office unless they're in trouble or they're about to be. Maria's hands were shaking as she stepped toward the cell door. Through the small window, she could see Officer Brennan had stopped mopping. He was staring directly at her cell, his face pale and drawn. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, of shared knowledge about what really happened to Claire Donovan. The cell door buzzed and slid open with a mechanical groan. Maria stepped into the corridor on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The walk to administration was exactly 437 steps. She'd counted them once during a transfer, back when she still believed in small forms of control, small ways to map and understand her confined world. Officer Brennan fell into step beside her, his hand resting on the baton at his belt. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, but Maria could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. They passed through 3 security checkpoints, each one requiring Maria to stop and be searched, patted down, scanned with a metal detector as if she might have acquired a weapon in the 30 seconds since the last checkpoint. The administrative wing was different from the rest of the prison. Here the walls were painted instead of bare concrete. The floors were carpeted. There were actual windows showing glimpses of the world beyond the razor wire, trees, sky, the parking lot where civilian staff came and went with an ease that seemed almost obscene. Assistant Warden Patricia Holloway's office sat at the end of a long hallway. Through the frosted glass door, Maria could see multiple silhouettes. More than just Holloway. The shapes moved and shifted, and Maria's mouth went dry. Officer Brennan opened the door without knocking. Inside, 3 people waited. Assistant Warden Holloway sat behind her desk, a severe woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. To her right stood Deputy Warden Marcus Webb, a broad-shouldered man whose reputation for violence against inmates was legendary. And in the corner, sitting in a chair that seemed too small for his frame, was Detective Raymond Cruz from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Maria recognized him immediately. He'd been the lead investigator on the convenience store murder. He'd taken her statement, promised her protection, assured her that testifying was the right thing to do. Then he'd disappeared after her arrest on drug charges, hadn't returned a single one of her desperate calls from county jail. "Miss Santos," Holloway said, her voice crisp and professional. "Please sit down." There was only one chair available, positioned in the center of the room so that all 3 officials could watch her simultaneously. Maria sat, acutely aware of Officer Brennan positioning himself directly behind her, blocking the door. Detective Cruz leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Maria, I'll get right to the point. We need your help with something." The words hung in the air like poison. Maria had learned that help in prison was never really help. It was always a trap, always a transaction where you gave up something valuable, information, dignity, safety, in exchange for a promise that would never be kept. "I don't understand," Maria said carefully. "You shared a housing unit with Claire Donovan," Cruz continued. "We have reason to believe she was in possession of certain materials before her accident. Materials that could be relevant to an ongoing investigation. So that was it. Claire's photographs. The evidence she'd claimed to have. They thought Maria knew where it was." "I barely knew her," Maria said. The lie came easily. In prison, lying was a survival skill, refined and practiced until it became instinct. "We weren't friends." Deputy Warden Webb spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel scraping concrete. "Ms. Donovan made several visits to the prison chapel in her final days. The chaplain's assistant logs show you were there during many of the same time periods. Coincidence?" Maria's mind raced. The chapel. She had been there, seeking some quiet, some reprieve from the constant noise and threat of the cell blocks. Claire had been there too, sitting alone in the back pew, her lips moving in what looked like prayer. But they'd never spoken. Maria had made a point of not speaking, of maintaining that crucial distance. "I go to chapel sometimes," Maria said. "So do a lot of women. It doesn't mean anything." Assistant Warden Holloway opened a file on her desk. "Your disciplinary record is clean. Exemplary, actually. No fights, no violations, no trouble whatsoever. You keep your head down, do your time quietly." She looked up, her eyes cold and calculating. "That makes you smart, Miss Santos. Smart enough to understand that cooperation with this investigation would reflect very favorably in your next parole hearing." There it was. The carrot and the stick presented simultaneously. Cooperate and maybe get out early. Refuse and spend every day of your full sentence in this place, watching your back, wondering when you'd end up like Claire Donovan. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Maria's voice was steadier than she felt. Detective Cruz pulled out a photograph. It showed a USB drive, small and black, the kind you could hide anywhere. "We believe Ms. Donovan concealed this somewhere in the prison before her accident. Hospital staff found reference to it in her personal journal, but the location is coded. The journal mentions the silent witness, which we believe might be you." Maria stared at the photograph, her mind spinning. Claire had been clever, far cleverer than anyone gave her credit for. If she'd hidden evidence, she'd done it well. But why would she reference Maria? They'd never spoken about anything significant. Unless the memory hit her like cold water. 3 weeks ago in the chapel. Maria had been kneeling in prayer when Claire had slipped into the pew beside her. For maybe 30 seconds they'd been side by side in silence. And then Claire had whispered, so quietly Maria had barely heard it, "If something happens to me, check the altar flowers. Only the silent ones can speak truth." At the time, Maria had thought it was religious rambling, the kind of cryptic nonsense people spoke when prison pressure cracked something inside them. But now, "I don't know anything about a USB drive," Maria said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Deputy Warden Webb pushed away from the wall, moving closer. Miss Santos, let me be very clear about something. Claire Donovan suffered a tragic fall. Slipped in the shower, hit her head. These things happen. Prisons are dangerous places. The threat was explicit. Cooperate or become another tragic accident. Maria looked at each of their faces in turn. Holloway calculating and cold. Webb violent and barely contained. Cruz guilty and desperate. And behind her, she could feel Officer Brennan's presence. The man who'd scrubbed a floor for hours trying to wash away evidence of what he'd done. I need to use the restroom, Maria said suddenly. Holloway frowned. This is not. It's a long walk back to D Block. Unless you want me to have an accident on your carpet. The crude pragmatism worked. Holloway made an irritated gesture. Officer Brennan, escort her to the staff facilities. 2 minutes. The bathroom was small, institutional, but blessedly private. Maria locked the door and leaned against the sink, her hands gripping the cold porcelain. Her reflection stared back at her, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a regulation braid, prison-issue uniform hanging loose on a frame that had lost 15 pounds since sentencing. Claire's words echoed in her mind. Check the altar flowers. Only the silent ones can speak truth. The prison chapel had artificial flowers on the altar. Cheap plastic arrangements that never died, never needed watering, never changed. Silent flowers. Silent witness. The connection was almost poetic in its simplicity. If Maria told them, if she led them to the USB drive, what happened next? The evidence gets buried, destroyed. Whatever corruption Claire had discovered would stay hidden. And Maria would be marked forever as a snitch, a collaborator, someone who couldn't be trusted by inmates or staff. But if she refused, she'd end up like Claire. A fall, an accident, another tragedy in a system built on violence and silence. She had maybe 90 seconds left before they came looking for her. Maria made her decision. She returned to Holloway's office with her face blank, her posture defeated. I remember something, she said quietly. Claire mentioned the chapel once. Said she liked to pray near the altar. Maybe that's where she would have hidden something? Cruz's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. Can you show us? I can try. They moved as a group through the prison. Holloway, Webb, Cruz, Brennan, and Maria at the center like a prisoner being led to execution. Inmates watched through cell windows, their faces carefully neutral, but Maria could feel their judgment. She was breaking the most fundamental rule. She was cooperating with the system. The chapel was empty at this hour, a small space with 20 wooden pews and a modest altar. The artificial flowers sat in 2 vases on either side of a simple wooden cross. Cheap roses and lilies, faded from years of fluorescent light. Maria approached the altar slowly, aware of all 4 officials watching her every movement. She reached for the left vase first, running her fingers through the plastic stems. Nothing. Then the right vase, checking each flower, each stem, searching for something small enough to hide, important enough to kill for. Her fingers found it wedged deep inside one of the artificial lilies. A small hard shape wrapped in plastic. She pulled it free, her heart hammering, and held it up to the light. A USB drive. Black. Small. Containing God knows what kind of evidence. Give it here, Deputy Warden Webb said, extending his hand. Maria looked at the drive, then at Webb, then at Detective Cruz. In that moment, she understood something fundamental. If she handed it over, the evidence would disappear. Cases would be closed, corruption would continue, and Claire Donovan would become just another tragic accident in a system built on silence. But if she didn't hand it over, she'd be dead before lights out. Miss Santos, Holloway said, her voice sharp with warning. Give Deputy Warden Webb the drive. Now. Maria's hand tightened around the small plastic case. Time seemed to slow, stretching each second into something thick and viscous. She could feel her pulse in her throat, could hear the blood rushing in her ears. And then she did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She swallowed it. The USB drive was small enough, slim enough. It went down hard, painful, scratching her throat. But it went down. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The shock was absolute. Then Deputy Warden Webb lunged forward, grabbing Maria by the shoulders. What did you stupid? It's inside me now, Maria said, her voice raw from the plastic edges scraping her throat. You want it? You'll have to wait for it. Or cut it out of me. Either way, you'll have to document what you're doing and why. The genius of it hit them all simultaneously. If they forced medical intervention to retrieve the drive, they'd have to file paperwork. Explain why. Create a record of something they desperately wanted to keep buried. Detective Cruz stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a desperate gamble. You just assaulted evidence in a criminal investigation. That's a federal crime. Add it to my charges, Maria said. I'm already in prison. What are you going to do, arrest me harder? We can make your life hell, Webb snarled, his grip on her shoulders tightening until pain shot down Maria's arms. You have no idea what we can do to you in here. I have a pretty good idea, Maria replied. I've seen what happens to women who know too much. I've seen what you did to Claire Donovan. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Officer Brennan flinched behind her. Webb's face went pale, then red with rage. You're making a serious mistake, Holloway said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Think very carefully about what happens next. Maria met her gaze steadily. I already did. Whatever's on that drive, Claire thought it was important enough to die for. I'm betting it's important enough to keep me alive for a while too. You can't retrieve it without documentation. You can't make me disappear without people asking questions about the evidence I swallowed. So we're at an impasse. An impasse that ends with you in administrative segregation, Holloway said. Solitary confinement. 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. No contact, no privileges, no relief. We can keep you there for months, years if necessary. And when that drive finally passes through your system, we'll be waiting. The threat was real. Solitary could break people, shatter their sanity in ways that physical violence never could. But it was also time. Time for the drive to pass through her system. Time for her to figure out her next move. Then I guess I'm going to the hole, Maria said. They moved her within the hour. No warning to Tasha, no chance to gather her few possessions. They stripped her, searched her thoroughly but futilely, the drive was already beyond reach, and dressed her in a paper-thin isolation suit. Then they walked her through the prison to C Block, where administrative segregation cells lined both sides of a narrow corridor. The cell was exactly as Holloway had described. 8 feet by 10 feet. A concrete slab bed with a thin mattress. A steel toilet and sink combination. A narrow slot in the door for food trays. And nothing else. No windows, no television, no books, no human contact beyond the guards who would check on her through the door slot every few hours. The door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin closing. Maria sat on the concrete bed and wrapped her arms around her knees. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of ventilation and the distant sounds of the prison beyond her walls. In the regular population there was always noise, voices, footsteps, the clang of metal on metal. Here there was nothing. Just her thoughts and the foreign object working its way through her digestive system. She had maybe 48 hours before the drive passed. 48 hours to figure out how to survive what came next. The first 24 hours were the worst. The isolation pressed against her like a physical weight. Her mind, deprived of stimulation, began to turn inward, replaying every moment of her arrest, her trial, her conviction. The faces of the men she testified against. The satisfied look on their lawyer's face when the drug charges were filed against her. The way Detective Cruz had avoided her eyes in the courtroom. She thought about Claire Donovan, whose body was probably in some county morgue by now, her death certificate listing accidental causes. What had Claire known that was worth killing for? What kind of corruption had she uncovered? Food came twice a day through the slot, cold, institutional, barely edible. Maria forced herself to eat anyway. She needed her strength. Needed to stay sharp. On the second day, a guard she didn't recognize opened the food slot and slid through not a tray but a piece of paper. Maria unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling. The message was typed, anonymous. The chaplain keeps visitor logs. Original copies in his desk. Third drawer left side. Someone should see them before they disappear too. Maria read it 3 times before tearing the paper into tiny pieces and flushing it down the toilet. Someone on the inside was trying to help her. Or trying to use her. In prison it was often impossible to tell the difference. By the 3rd day the drive had passed. Maria found it in the toilet during her morning routine, still wrapped in the plastic she'd swallowed it in. She cleaned it carefully with water from the sink, then stood staring at the tiny device that had cost Claire her life and might yet cost Maria hers. What do you do with evidence when you're locked in a cell with no computer, no allies, no way to see what it contains? The food slot opened. This time, Officer Brennan's face appeared in the narrow opening. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. You're getting a visitor, he said quietly. Detective Cruz. He's coming back to make you a deal. What kind of deal? The kind where you hand over the drive and they transfer you to another facility. Fresh start, clean slate, early parole consideration. All you have to do is forget what you know. Maria moved closer to the door, close enough to see Brennan's eyes clearly. And if I refuse? Then they'll keep you in the hole until you break. Or until you have an accident. Same as Claire. He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She wasn't supposed to die. It was just supposed to be a warning. But things got out of hand and now. He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Who gave the order? Maria asked. Does it matter? The system protects itself. Always has, always will. You're one woman with one piece of evidence. They're an entire institution with unlimited resources and no accountability. You can't win. Maybe not, Maria said. But I can make sure the truth doesn't die in here with me. Brennan stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached through the slot and dropped something small onto the floor of her cell. There's a reporter. Independent journalist named Sarah Chin. She's been investigating prison corruption for 2 years. Her card has her contact information. I don't know how you'll get it to her from in here, but if anyone can do something with what's on that drive, it's her. Before Maria could respond, Brennan pulled back and the slot snapped shut. Maria picked up the business card. Sarah Chin, investigative journalist. A phone number, an email address, a website. All useless to someone in solitary confinement with no phone privileges, no computer access, no communication with the outside world. Unless the chaplain, the visitor logs, the anonymous message. Maria made a decision. When Detective Cruz arrived 2 hours later, she was ready. He sat on the opposite side of a steel table in a small interview room, looking tired and frustrated. Let's not play games, Maria. You know what I want. Hand over the drive, tell me you didn't look at it, and this all goes away. You get transferred, get a fresh start somewhere else. We both walk away clean. What's on the drive? Maria asked. You don't need to know that. Then why should I give it to you? Cruz leaned forward, his voice hardening. Because if you don't, you'll rot in administrative segregation until your mind breaks. And when that happens, nobody will care what you say or what you think you know. You'll just be another damaged inmate who couldn't handle isolation. Maria reached into the pocket of her isolation suit and pulled out the USB drive. She set it on the table between them. Cruz's eyes lit up with triumph. Smart choice, he said, reaching for it. Maria's hand shot out, covering the drive. I want something first. You're not in a position to negotiate. I want to see the chaplain. I want access to the chapel for religious services. Those are my rights under the First Amendment. You can't deny them even in segregation. Cruz frowned. What are you playing at? I need to confess, Maria said simply. I need spiritual counsel. That's all. You get the drive. I get my soul back. The request seemed reasonable enough. Innocuous enough. After 30 seconds of consideration, Cruz nodded. Fine. One visit with the chaplain. Then you hand over the drive and this whole thing ends. Deal. Father Michael O'Connor had been the prison chaplain for 7 years. He was a gentle man in his 60s with kind eyes and a manner that suggested he'd seen terrible things but chose to believe in redemption anyway. When he arrived in the small interview room where Maria waited, his expression was concerned. Miss Santos, I heard you requested spiritual counsel. Of course I'm happy to help, but I must say, this is highly unusual given the circumstances. Maria glanced at the guard standing by the door, not Brennan but a younger officer she didn't recognize. She lowered her voice. Father, I need to confess something. In private. That's my right, isn't it? Confidentiality between priest and penitent. O'Connor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. He spoke to the guard. Privacy is required for confession. Unless you want to violate Miss Santos's constitutional rights. The guard looked uncertain but stepped outside, leaving the door cracked. Not ideal privacy but better than nothing. Maria leaned close to Father O'Connor. I don't have much time, so I'll be direct. Claire Donovan was murdered because she had evidence of corruption. That evidence is on this USB drive. She slipped the drive across the table. Someone gave me a contact for an investigative journalist named Sarah Chin. If this drive gets to her, Claire's death means something. If it doesn't, the corruption continues. O'Connor stared at the small device with something like horror. Miss Santos, you're asking me to? I'm asking you to bear witness. Isn't that what priests do? Bear witness to truth. This could put me in danger. Could cost me my position. It already cost Claire her life, Maria said quietly. And it might cost mine too. But someone has to break the silence. Someone has to be willing to speak truth even when it's dangerous. For a long moment, Father O'Connor said nothing. His hand hovered over the USB drive, trembling slightly. Maria could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. Duty versus safety, truth versus self-preservation. Finally, he picked up the drive and slipped it into his pocket. "May God forgive me," he whispered. "He will," Maria said, "because you're doing the right thing." When Detective Cruz returned an hour later, Maria told him the drive had passed through her system and she'd flushed it. The lie was simple, direct, and utterly believable given the circumstances. Cruz was furious, threatened charges, threatened extended segregation, threatened everything he could think of. But without the drive, without evidence, there was nothing he could do except exact petty revenge. Maria spent 3 more months in administrative segregation. 3 months of silence, isolation, and the slowly growing certainty that her gamble had failed. That the drive never made it out of the prison. That Father O'Connor had been too afraid or too compromised. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, she was abruptly transferred back to general population. Tasha was waiting when Maria returned to their old cell. She didn't say anything at first, just studied Maria with those hard, knowing eyes. Finally, she pulled out a newspaper she'd hidden under her mattress. The headline read, "State Prison Corruption Ring Exposed. Evidence Reveals Decades of Abuse, Cover-Ups." The article was written by Sarah Chin. Maria read every word, her hands shaking. Claire's photographs hadn't just shown one incident. They'd documented years of corruption. Guards selling drugs to inmates, administrators accepting bribes, systematic abuse covered up by falsified medical records. Claire had been gathering evidence for months before they killed her. And now it was all public. All documented. All undeniable. "They arrested 5 people yesterday," Tasha said quietly, "including Deputy Warden Webb. Officer Brennan cut a deal, immunity for testimony. The whole thing's coming down." Maria folded the newspaper carefully. Claire didn't die for nothing. No. But she still died. And you? Tasha gestured at Maria's gaunt frame, the haunted look in her eyes. "You're not the same person who went into the hole 3 months ago. Isolation breaks something in people. Changes them." She was right. Maria could feel the change. A hollowness where optimism used to live, a hypervigilance that would probably never fade, a bone-deep understanding that justice was rare and survival was conditional. But she was alive. And the truth for once had won. 2 years later, Maria was granted early parole. The charges against her, the planted drugs that had sent her here, were being reviewed as part of the broader corruption investigation. Detective Cruz, it turned out, had been one of the officers accepting payments to look the other way. On her release day, Maria walked through the prison gates carrying nothing but a small bag of belongings and the weight of everything she'd learned inside. Father O'Connor was waiting in the parking lot, older now, grayer, but still kind. "I wanted to see you off," he said. "To tell you that what you did mattered. The changes happening here, the oversight, the accountability, it started with your courage." Maria shook her head. "It started with Claire's courage. I just made sure it didn't end with her death." "That's courage too," O'Connor insisted. "The quiet kind. The kind that survives." As they walked toward his car, Maria looked back at the prison one final time. Somewhere inside, women were still fighting to survive each day. Still navigating impossible choices between silence and danger, complicity and resistance. She couldn't save them all. Couldn't fix a system that was built to break people. But she'd done what Claire asked without words, without promises. She'd been the silent witness who finally spoke. And sometimes in a world built on silence, that was enough. Maria's last thought as they drove away was of Claire Donovan, a woman she'd barely known, whose whispered words in a chapel had changed everything. In prison you learned that survival meant silence. But some things were worth breaking that silence for. Even if the cost was high. Even if you paid for it every day after. Truth had a price. But so did silence. And Maria had learned which one she could live with.